All my life, I was the quiet one, the kind of person who blended into the background so naturally that people sometimes forgot I was even there. My sister, Hannah, was the opposite in every possible way. Radiant, stylish, charming, the center of every conversation. She had the kind of confidence that drew people in, the kind I could never fake. My brother, Ethan, was the achiever, the golden child with a well-paying job, a company car, and the kind of charisma that made our parents beam with pride. And then there was me, Lucy, the sweet one, the reliable one, or as my mother once said during a family brunch, the simple one. That word, simple, haunted me more than she knew. It wasn't meant as an insult, but it carried a quiet cruelty. It was the kind of word that meant forgettable. I always laughed it off, keeping my smile steady, even when I could feel the sting deep in my chest. I had learned early that if I didn't laugh, they'd notice my silence, and that would just make things worse. So I smiled and nodded and told myself that being invisible was better than being ridiculed. When Hannah announced her engagement, our house turned into a theater of excitement. My mother practically moved in with her to help with planning, discussing flower arrangements, cake designs, and color themes like generals mapping out a battle strategy. My father busied himself with guest lists and seating charts, and Ethan was, as always, the proud older brother, making jokes about Hannah finally settling down. I was there too, just not really part of it. My mother gave me small tasks, like helping with invitation envelopes or setting up chairs. "Lucy's got a good eye for details," she said one afternoon while sorting ribbons. "And she's got time on her hands anyway." That last part stung, though I pretended not to notice. I wasn't asked to be a bridesmaid, even though Hannah had chosen 3 of her college friends and 1 of her cousins from her fiancé's side. When I asked why, Hannah smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Lucy, it's not that I didn't think of you. It's just, I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable up there with the others. You're more of a behind-the-scenes person." It was meant kindly, I think. But kindness from her always came with a sharp edge. The night of the engagement party arrived faster than I expected. The hotel ballroom was grand. White marble floors, golden chandeliers, and tables decorated with blush pink roses. Everyone looked perfect, glowing in expensive dresses and tailored suits. I had spent hours deciding what to wear, finally settling on a soft blue dress I'd bought on sale months earlier. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant in its simplicity. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I actually felt pretty until I arrived at the venue. My mother's eyes scanned me the moment I walked in, her expression tightening. "Lucy," she sighed under her breath, "couldn't you have done something more festive? You look so plain. This is your sister's engagement, not a church service." I froze, clutching my purse a little tighter. "I thought this dress was nice," I murmured, but she was already moving on, waving to another guest. Hannah and her friends glanced in my direction, giggling softly. I caught a whisper. Something about, "She really doesn't try, does she?" And my heart sank. I found my table at the corner of the hall, far from the main stage, and sat down, wishing I could disappear. Music filled the air, lively and elegant. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. I smiled when people passed my table, but few stopped to say hello. I was there, but not really there. I tried to focus on the food, picking at the salad on my plate, when I heard Hannah's voice ring out across the hall. "Everyone! Can we have your attention?" She stood with her fiancé, her diamond ring catching the light like a beacon. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her smile dazzling. "And thank you to my amazing family, Mom, Dad, Ethan, and of course Lucy, for helping me make this night so special." There was polite applause, and for a brief moment I smiled. Then Hannah added with a teasing grin, "Lucy, our quiet decorator, the one who made sure every flower was in place. Maybe next time you'll let us give you a little makeover before you hide behind those centerpieces." Laughter erupted. My mother chuckled awkwardly, my brother smirked, and I felt my stomach twist. My face burned, but I managed a small smile, pretending to take it as a joke. Inside, though, I wanted to run. I had never felt so publicly humiliated. I slipped out onto the terrace for air. The night sky stretched above me, soft and dark, scattered with faint stars. I took a deep breath, trying to push back the tears that threatened to spill. Inside, the music played on. Through the glass doors, I could see my family surrounded by guests, radiant and proud. They didn't need me. I was just the extra piece, the quiet filler in a perfect family portrait. I was ready to leave when I heard a commotion inside, followed by the sound of new footsteps entering the room. Curious, I turned slightly toward the doors. A tall man had just walked in. Broad shoulders, dark hair, wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to catch the light just right. His confidence was quiet but commanding. People seemed to make way for him as he moved. He wasn't smiling in the way men do when they want to be noticed. His expression was thoughtful, searching. For some reason, my heart began to race. He scanned the room, eyes moving slowly over the crowd, and then he looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and time seemed to pause. It was ridiculous, the kind of moment you only read about, but it was real. He didn't look away. There was something almost knowing in his gaze, as though he'd been looking for me all along. My instinct was to turn away, to avoid attention as I always did, but something about him made me freeze. Then, without hesitation, he began walking toward me. My pulse quickened with every step he took. Guests turned to glance at him. He was clearly someone important, someone who carried himself like he belonged everywhere he went. And yet, his eyes stayed on me. When he reached my table, he smiled. A soft, confident curve that didn't feel forced. "Ah," he said warmly, as though greeting someone he knew. "There you are. My mystery date has been hiding from me all evening." I blinked, stunned. What?" I managed to stammer. The entire room seemed to fall silent for a moment. Heads turned. My mother's laughter faded mid-sentence and Hannah's mouth fell open. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. He pulled out the chair next to me and sat down, his presence commanding yet oddly comforting. "You really made it difficult to find you," he continued casually, as though this were a perfectly normal situation. "I was starting to think you'd stood me up." I stared at him, utterly speechless. He glanced at my plate, then at me, his smile deepening. "You don't talk much, do you?" he teased lightly. "That's fine. I like quiet company." My family watched from across the room, whispers already starting to ripple. I could feel their confusion, their disbelief. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't know who this man was or why he had chosen me of all people, but I wasn't about to ruin the moment. "I'm sorry," I said softly, my voice trembling a little. "You must be mistaken." He tilted his head. "Maybe, but if I am, then I don't mind being wrong." Then he leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Play along if you want to make them wonder." Something in his tone made my heart skip. I glanced toward my family, my mother glaring, Hannah's eyes wide with irritation, Ethan smirking with curiosity, and then back at him. A spark of rebellion, something I'd never felt before, flickered inside me. For once, I wanted to see the confusion on their faces. I smiled faintly and said, "Well, you did take your time getting here." He chuckled softly, his eyes lighting up. "Touché." The sound of it made me relax. For the first time all evening, I wasn't thinking about being plain or unnoticed. People were watching me, not Hannah, not my mother, me. And the man beside me seemed perfectly at ease under the scrutiny. My mother approached our table, her polite smile trembling. "Lucy, darling," she began, her voice tight. "You didn't tell us you were bringing someone." Before I could respond, he stood, shaking her hand with practiced charm. "I'm Daniel," he said smoothly. "Lucy mentioned her family would be here. I didn't realize I'd be meeting everyone so soon." My mother blinked, clearly thrown off. "Oh, well, how lovely," she said stiffly. "And how unexpected." Hannah appeared behind her, eyes narrowing, her perfect smile strained. "Daniel," she repeated, as if testing the name. "You two know each other well?" Daniel glanced at me, then smiled easily. "You could say that. She's full of surprises, your sister." I nearly laughed at the irony. Surprises were the last thing anyone ever associated with me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Daniel stayed by my side, engaging me in conversation about art, travel, and books, things I actually loved but rarely spoke about. He listened, really listened, as if my words mattered. My family watched, from across the room, confused, intrigued, maybe even a little envious. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like fading into the background. When the party ended, Daniel offered to walk me out. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should keep playing along, but something inside me said yes. As we stepped into the night air, I glanced back through the ballroom's glass doors. My mother's face was pale with disbelief, Hannah's frozen smile faltering as she watched me leave, not alone this time, but with someone who saw me. And that was the night everything began to change. For years I had believed that being plain meant being invisible. But that night, with Daniel's words echoing in my mind, my mystery date, I realized that maybe invisibility was just the story I'd been told. Maybe I was never plain at all. Maybe no one had ever looked closely enough to see me. The next morning felt like waking up in a dream I wasn't ready to end. I replayed every detail from the night before. The way Daniel had walked into that ballroom like he belonged everywhere. The way his eyes had found mine as though there was no one else in the room. The way my family's whispers had turned into stunned silence. For once, I had been the mystery. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a small smile tugging at my lips, half expecting to wake up and realize I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I remembered his voice, low and certain. "Would you be free tomorrow?" The memory sent a rush of warmth through me, followed immediately by a wave of panic. What would I even wear? What would we talk about when there weren't champagne glasses and watchful eyes between us? And most of all, why me? Why had a man like Daniel chosen to walk straight toward me out of everyone in that glittering room? I spent the day pretending to do chores, but my mind was elsewhere. When my mother called in the afternoon, her voice was tight with false casualness. "Lucy," she began, "your sister said you were seen with someone last night. Who was he?" I could hear Hannah giggling faintly in the background. "Just a friend," I said simply, though even I didn't believe the words. "Oh, a friend?" my mother pressed. "He certainly didn't act like just a friend. Do you even know him?" I hesitated before replying. "I'm having lunch with him today." The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she sighed. "Lucy, just be careful. Men like that don't look twice at girls like you unless they want something." Her words hit me like a slap. I hung up before she could say more, standing in the middle of my room with my hands trembling. A part of me wanted to believe her, because that would mean I wouldn't have to risk disappointment. But another part of me, the part that had started to wake up last night, whispered that maybe she was wrong. I chose a cream-colored blouse and a soft gray skirt, simple but clean, modest but elegant. My reflection in the mirror wasn't glamorous, but there was a quiet confidence in my face that I hadn't noticed before. When I arrived at the art exhibit, the place was buzzing with soft chatter, the air filled with the faint scent of coffee and paint. I scanned the room nervously until I saw him, Daniel, standing near a large abstract painting, hands in his pockets, talking to a small group of people. He looked effortlessly composed, his posture relaxed but assured. When his eyes caught mine, he excused himself immediately and crossed the room, his smile widening. "There's my mystery date," he said lightly, his tone teasing but warm. You actually came. You sound surprised, I replied, smiling despite myself. Maybe I was afraid you'd realize you could do better, he said, his eyes flickering with humor. But now I'm sure you couldn't. He offered me his arm, and we began walking through the gallery together. The walls were filled with paintings, some vibrant and alive, others soft and haunting. He explained each piece with quiet passion, not in the pretentious way some people do, but like someone who genuinely saw the world differently. I found myself relaxing, even laughing. You really love this, I said. He nodded. Art shows us what people hide. Sometimes, I think paintings are the only honest thing left. I liked that. I liked that he wasn't just handsome and confident. He was thoughtful. The more he spoke, the more curious I became. At one point, we stopped before a small painting of a woman sitting at a dinner table alone, her face half turned toward the viewer, her eyes filled with something between longing and strength. That's my favorite, he said quietly. Most people overlook it. I tilted my head, studying it. Why? He smiled faintly. Because she's not loud, not dramatic. But there's something about her stillness. It makes people uncomfortable. They can't figure her out. He glanced at me and I realized he wasn't really talking about the painting. My breath caught slightly, and I looked away, pretending to focus on the brushstrokes. We spent hours wandering through the gallery. Daniel introduced me to a few of his friends, artists, curators, business partners. To my surprise, he introduced me as someone important, not as a date, not as a friend, but simply as Lucy. And somehow, the way he said my name made it sound like a title, like something that deserved to be known. People listened when I spoke, even when I stammered a little. No one looked past me. It was disorienting, almost unreal. When the event ended, Daniel offered to drive me home. I hesitated, but he insisted gently. The ride was quiet at first, the city lights flashing past like fading memories. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since last night. Why did you pretend to know me? He smiled slightly, keeping his eyes on the road. Because you looked like you needed someone to remind you that you exist. I frowned. That's a strange thing to say. Maybe, he admitted. But it's true. You were sitting there like a ghost in your own story. And I couldn't stand it. His words made something inside me ache, an ache that was both painful and healing. You don't even know me, I whispered. Not yet, he said, glancing at me. But I'd like to. He dropped me off at my apartment, and as I stepped out of the car, he called after me. Lucy, don't let them decide who you are. I turned, meeting his gaze through the open window. I'm trying, I said softly. Good, he replied. Because once you see your worth, no one can take it away again. Then he was gone, the sound of his car fading into the distance, leaving me standing in the quiet street under the pale glow of the streetlights. The days that followed felt different. The world looked the same, but I didn't. I caught my reflection in windows and mirrors and didn't immediately look away. My co-workers at the small design office where I worked even commented that I seemed brighter. My mother, however, remained skeptical. When I mentioned Daniel again, she sighed. Just remember, Lucy, men like him don't stay with plain girls for long. Enjoy your attention while it lasts. Her words should have hurt, but instead, they only made me realize how much I'd let her shape my self-image for years. This time I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, maybe he sees something you don't. That silence on the phone afterward was almost satisfying. A week later, Daniel invited me to dinner. The restaurant was elegant but cozy, with candlelight that made everything glow. When I walked in, he stood to greet me, looking genuinely happy to see me. You clean up well, he said playfully. I didn't clean up, I replied. This is just me. His grin widened. Even better. The conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me about his travels, about growing up with parents who never believed in slowing down, about losing someone he loved years ago, and how it had changed the way he saw people. I told him about my family, the teasing, the labels, the small ways they made me feel invisible. He didn't interrupt or try to fix it. He just listened. And in that listening, I felt something shift. When the waiter brought dessert, Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Do you know why I called you my mystery date that night?" he asked. I laughed. "Because it was the easiest excuse to sit at my table?" "Maybe," he said, "but also because you reminded me of something I used to paint, a woman who didn't know she was beautiful yet." I looked at him, unsure what to say. He wasn't flirting. His tone was too sincere. "You're different, Lucy," he continued quietly. "You don't chase attention. You don't even realize when you have it." His gaze held mine, and for a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. I had never been looked at like that before, not as someone to compare or pity, but as someone to see. That night, when he dropped me home again, he walked me to my door. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. "I had a good time," I said. "So did I," he replied. "Can I see you again?" My heart fluttered. "You don't get tired of plain people easily, do you?" I teased, half meaning it. He smiled gently. "You're not plain, Lucy. You're real. And people have forgotten how to appreciate real." He touched my hand briefly, a simple human gesture that felt more intimate than any grand romantic act. Then he said goodnight and left. Inside my apartment, I stood by the window long after he was gone, watching the empty street, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, hope. But alongside it was fear. Because deep down, I knew the world I came from, the one that had named me plain, would not let me change without a fight. My family wouldn't believe Daniel's interest was real. They would tear it apart, analyze it, and turn it into another way to remind me I wasn't enough. Still, as I looked at my reflection that night, I whispered to myself, maybe this time, I'll be the one who decides who I am. What I didn't know then was that Daniel's arrival in my life was more than chance. It was a test of everything I thought I knew about love, pride, and revenge. Because sometimes the stranger who sees your worth also forces you to confront those who never did. And in doing so, you learn that the greatest transformation doesn't happen when someone else saves you. It happens when you realize you were never meant to be saved at all. The weeks after that night felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally breathe. I wasn't hiding behind other people's shadows anymore. I had found a quiet strength in being seen for who I was, and Daniel seemed to see every part of me I had spent years trying to conceal. We met often, sometimes for coffee at small corner cafes, sometimes for walks through the park, and sometimes for no reason at all except to talk. He had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, of turning silence into comfort instead of awkwardness. He told me stories about his travels, his work, and his passion for helping young artists who couldn't afford to chase their dreams. I listened, fascinated, realizing how much depth there was behind that confident smile. One evening, he asked if I'd ever thought of showing my own art. I laughed nervously, brushing the idea aside. "My sketches aren't worth showing," I said. "They're just things I do to pass the time." He looked at me with that same patient intensity that made me feel both exposed and safe. "That's what every real artist says," he told me. "You just don't see your worth yet." It was Daniel who encouraged me to apply for a design scholarship I'd seen online, but never dared to consider. "What's the worst that can happen?" he said with a grin. "They say no? Then you try again. But if they say yes," he trailed off, his eyes gleaming, "then you'll realize you've been selling yourself short all your life." I hesitated for days before finally submitting my portfolio. When I told my mother, she dismissed it with a sigh. "Lucy, that's sweet, but you know how competitive those things are. You should focus on something more practical." Her words didn't sting the way they once did. I simply replied, "Maybe practical isn't what I want anymore." That silence on the phone afterward told me everything. She didn't know what to do with this version of me. Daniel stood by me through every moment of uncertainty. He reviewed my sketches late at night, leaving little notes of encouragement in the margins. "Your lines have emotion," one note said. "They feel like someone who's survived being invisible." It made me cry, not because it hurt, but because it was the first time someone had seen that truth in me. When the scholarship committee called a month later, I almost dropped the phone. I'd been accepted. They wanted to feature my work in a small local exhibition before sending it for review abroad. I called Daniel immediately, and his laughter on the other end of the line was pure joy. "I knew it," he said. "You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself." The night of the exhibition, I wore a simple cream dress and tied my hair up loosely. For once, I didn't try to look like anyone else. The gallery was softly lit, the walls lined with paintings and sketches from other scholarship recipients. Mine were grouped under a small sign that read "The Quiet Light" by Lucy Turner. My heart raced when I saw my name in print. It felt surreal, like I was seeing a stranger's name. Daniel arrived soon after, looking as effortlessly composed as always. But there was something softer in his expression that night. "Guest of honor," he teased, handing me a single white rose. "Don't forget to act mysterious for the cameras." I laughed, shaking my head, but his words came true faster than I expected. Photographers moved through the room, capturing moments of the event. I wasn't used to attention, but Daniel stayed by my side, introducing me to people as though I belonged there. Halfway through the evening, as I stood near one of my larger pieces, a faceless woman sitting beneath a single beam of light, I felt a familiar chill crawl up my spine. My mother's voice cut through the hum of conversation like a blade. "Lucy?" I turned, startled. There she was, wearing her pearls and her perfectly pressed smile. Hannah stood beside her, dazzling as always, her fiancé at her side, and my father just behind them, looking unsure of why they were even there. "Mom?" I managed, my throat dry. "What are you—" "Hannah saw the event online," my mother interrupted smoothly. "We thought we'd come and support you." Her tone suggested it was charity, not pride, that had brought them. Hannah's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Daniel, and I could see the flicker of recognition, the memory of that night at the engagement party. "Oh," she said, lips curving. "That's him, the mysterious stranger." Daniel noticed them before I could respond. He walked over with calm assurance, extending a polite smile. "Mrs. Turner," he said warmly, offering his hand. "It's good to finally meet under better circumstances." My mother blinked, thrown off balance. "Oh, Mr. "Call me Daniel," he said easily. "Lucy's told me about her family." Hannah's smirk faltered slightly. "I bet she has," she muttered, but Daniel didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned to my mother again and said, "You must be proud. She's one of the most promising artists I've met." My mother's eyes darted toward me, searching for something. Proof that this was all a joke, perhaps. But when she saw the plaque beside my artwork and the small crowd gathered around it, her posture changed. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in her expression. "It's impressive," she said slowly. "I didn't know you were still drawing." "I never stopped," I replied quietly. "You just stopped looking." She didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the painting again, the faceless woman under the light. "Is that you?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath. "It used to be." Daniel's hand brushed mine gently, grounding me. I felt the weight of every unspoken year between us. The years of being told I was too quiet, too plain, too small to matter. And now, standing there in a room filled with people who saw me for what I was, I finally understood how wrong they had been. The evening unfolded like a movie I never wanted to end. Guests complimented my work, some even asking to buy prints. A reporter from a local magazine interviewed me briefly, asking about my inspiration. It came from years of silence, I told her honestly. From being told I wasn't enough until I decided I didn't need anyone's permission to be. Daniel watched me as I spoke, his expression unreadable but proud. When the applause came at the end of the showcase, I looked out into the crowd and saw my mother clapping slowly, her face unreadable, and Hannah looking at me with something sharp and jealous flickering in her eyes. Later, as the event wound down, my mother approached me again, her voice gentler this time. "Lucy, I didn't realize how talented you were." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever heard from her. "You never asked," I replied simply. There was no anger in my voice, just truth. She nodded slightly, her eyes dropping to the floor. Maybe I should have. For a moment, I thought she might say more, but she didn't. She just turned and walked toward the exit with my father. Hannah lingered a little longer, her gaze drifting between me and Daniel. "Well," she said finally, forcing a smile. "Looks like the plain one got her fairy tale after all." I met her eyes, steady and unshaken. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped believing the story you all wrote for me." Her smile faltered, and she turned away without another word. When the last guests left, the gallery felt still and sacred. Daniel stood beside me looking at my paintings one more time. "You did it," he said softly. "You changed the narrative." I smiled faintly. "You helped me." He shook his head. "No, Lucy, I just held up a mirror." "You did the rest." He reached for my hand, and as his fingers intertwined with mine, something inside me settled. I wasn't waiting to be validated anymore. I had already found my worth. A few weeks later, I received the official letter. My scholarship had been upgraded. They wanted to sponsor my work internationally. The gallery wanted to feature my art permanently. Life, which once felt like a narrow hallway of small choices, suddenly opened into something wide and alive. My mother called to congratulate me, her tone hesitant but sincere. "Lucy," she said, "I misjudged you." "No," I answered gently. "You just never really saw me." There was silence, then a soft sigh. "I see you now." When the international exhibit finally opened, Daniel flew with me to attend. Cameras flashed as we stepped inside, and I couldn't help but think back to that night at Hannah's engagement. The laughter, the whispers, the humiliation. I had walked into that ballroom invisible. Now I walked into this one shining, not because of the man beside me, but because I had learned to stand on my own. As the announcer introduced me to the audience, I caught sight of my family in the crowd, sitting together, pride and awe mixing on their faces. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father clapped, and Hannah smiled faintly, though I could tell it cost her something. When Daniel took the stage to speak, his voice carried through the hall like music. "I once met a woman who thought she was plain," he said, glancing at me. "But she taught me that plain is just another word for unappreciated beauty. Sometimes the rarest souls are the ones who shine quietly until someone looks close enough to see the light." Then he turned toward my family's table, his smile calm and certain. "Mrs. Turner, you were right about one thing. Lucy is plain. Plain extraordinary." The crowd laughed softly, applauding. My mother smiled through tears. As the applause swelled around me, I looked out over the audience, feeling a strange peace wash over me. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen, to be enough, to prove something to people who had already decided who I was. But now I didn't need their approval. I had rewritten my story, brushstroke by brushstroke, moment by moment. I wasn't the plain one anymore. I was the woman who had walked through silence and found her voice, who had turned pain into purpose, who had learned that true beauty isn't loud, it's resilient. And as Daniel's hand found mine once more under the warm lights of the gallery, I smiled. Not for the cameras, not for my family, but for the girl I used to be. Because she had finally been seen.